listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Smarter podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the connection between reliability and safety. It's a theme that's been discussed, debated, and observed for decades. Though safety regulations isn't a flashy new thing, it's still really important, and it is core to keeping your operations running. Our experts today are going to discuss some current observations on the topic and some things that you can do at any level to move the needle towards safe and effective operations. So who are the experts that are joining me today? I'm here today with Ron Moore and John Cray. So let me introduce them quickly. Ron Moore is a master's degree professional engineer, author of the Reliability and Maintenance Bible, if I may say so myself, Making Common Sense Common Practice, Models for Operational Excellence, and many other books and articles. For decades, Ron's been a thought leader and an evangelist for reliability and operational excellence. And then we also joined with John Cray. John has over 30 years of experience in maintenance management, reliability engineering, capital projects, and reliability and maintenance leadership, manufacturing leadership. A degreed mechanical engineer, John also has extensive technical, safety, CMMS, and organizational change management expertise. So welcome to the podcast, Ron and John.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
All right, well, we have been discussing this amongst ourselves, but now I want to go ahead and jump in for our listeners on our great topic today. And we'll start off with you, Ron, because you wrote the groundbreaking research on the connection between reliability and safety. When you compared OEE to percent reactive maintenance, when you're talking about injury rates as compared to work order types and looking at those connections. So for decades, you've been sharing this with our community in manufacturing, maintenance, and reliability. So can you share your thoughts on what's new here? Or if nothing is new, then what's missing? Why aren't people getting this message?
Well, it's not really new, at least from my perspective, because as you just said, I've been observing this so-called, I don't know, well, I wouldn't call it a phenomenon, just observing factual data for years now. And as it turns out, like you just said, as OEE improves, injury rate goes down. I've got 7 different sets of data from various industries. It's not just one. It's everything from food to steel to chemicals to whatever. And the same thing is true relative to as for example, as OEE improves, reactive maintenance goes down. As reactive maintenance goes up, injury rate goes up, and so on. So it's really a compelling argument for improving your operating practices, not just maintenance, but your design, procurement, operating, and of course, maintenance practices. Because most of the defects to create the maintenance requirements, particularly the reactive stuff, is because of some dysfunction or malfunction upstream of maintenance. It's something that poor design, poor procurement, poor operating practices. And yeah, of course, you do have the odd maintenance practice that's poorly performed many times because of a lack of training and time. In any event, back to the question about why haven't things changed? Well, I think it's primarily because senior leaders, CEOs, vice presidents, and so on, don't really understand what reliability is about and how to achieve it. They just don't know. And they always say that, safety is a top priority. Sometimes they'll say the top priority. I don't really believe that. Making money is the top priority.
Right, if you don't reporting make money, to shareholders, right? Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't make money, then you don't have employees, so you can't. You're absolutely safe or not safe at all. It depends on your perspective. But in any event, they really don't understand the reliability, how to get it, and why it's so important to safety and costs and profits and environmental performance and all the rest. So there's a real need to educate senior management on this relationship, and particularly on their role in getting it and how to get it. So that's my general take on it. So I'll
Right.
bounce it
So
back to you.
yeah, absolutely. I think, well, one thing that we have discussed, with John as well, is that with safety, a lot of people focus on like PPE, protective equipment, behaviors, pounding that in. And you said, that could be effective to a point,
To a
but
point. Yeah.
to a point. And can you speak a little bit more about that? What do you mean to a point, that
Well,
focusing on the safety training specifically, separate from the rest of the operation?
yeah.
That it's a discipline that's overreaching, but still taught separately from operations, design, maintenance, all that.
Yeah. Well, I've got a case study where a large chemical company, they began their safety program with your traditional activities, personal behaviors, PPE, lockout, tagout, vessel entry, simple things like holding the handrail when you go up a stair case and all that sort of thing. And that all works to a point. And in fact, they got dramatic improvement over the course of about 5 years. And then in subsequent 5 years, they were better than average, and you would hope they would be, but they never did really get to a so-called world-class level. And, having been through any number of their operations, it was clear to me that the problem wasn't, the doing PPE and your traditional safety practices. The problem was they had too many breakdowns, too many uncontrolled events in the process itself, and so on. And that resulted in disruptive activities,
Yes.
unplanned reactive activities. And the problem is, the more of that you have, then the greater the risk is of injury, because you don't have the time to properly think through, properly plan, and address things in a more thoughtful manner. And so that puts you at greater risk of injury. And so after that initial dramatic improvement, they just kind of bounced along, sort of better than average. And I think John said, and he can elaborate, you can be safe, have safe practice, and still get injured. And not because you weren't doing the things you should be doing, but because you got greater risk of injury because of all the reactive behaviors. Maybe I'll let John speak to that.
Yeah, I like to say you can work safe in an unsafe environment.
And that's the phrase. Thank you, John. That's a better phrase.
And I mean, I've seen that firsthand a number of times as a consultant, but mainly as a practitioner. And the issue to me is that part of what Ron talks about with the reactive maintenance and the plateauing of performance is you really don't have good standard work. And when you don't have good standard work, you're beginning to allow the opportunity to take shortcuts. And so, part of that is, well, how do you address that? Well, if I can standardize my maintenance and reliability practices so I have the same work execution every day, because Ron said that a lot of leaders don't understand reliability, but if I could have standardized maintenance work, that kind of discipline and culture can influence the environmental health and safety aspects of an operating plant. But when you're operating in a reactive environment, as Ron keeps highlighting, it is tough to take a step back and say, okay, we need to do something different in order to get a different result. And it takes a little bit of courage as well.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to add to that, so what drives that reactive behavior? Well, I think a lot of times it's two things. It's having poor operating practices that induce the failures that then result in the unexpected events, or at times it can be a poor design where you don't design things for ease of operation and ease of maintenance, which similarly results in these unexpected events that create the reactive behaviors. So you can have standard work, but if the number of defects coming into the system overwhelms your ability to do work management, planning, and scheduling, then you're still going to be at substantial risk of, not just failures and costs and lost production, but also of injury. So that has to be addressed by the leadership of the organization.
So that's reducing defects across the entire life cycle, across the entire operations.
Yeah.
No, I think it's so enlightening what you're talking about. Standard work, reducing variation, reducing defects across the life cycle, courage from leadership to understand what, the true issues are and how to achieve the changes in the optimization by understanding holistically what the system's doing.
Yeah.
So I want to bring up some research published this year. Ron, this isn't yours, believe it or not.
Lots of people out there do more than I do. So
I don't
more
know
power
about
to
that,
them.
but I'm just going to read some of the research we found about the top 5 biggest safety concerns in the manufacturing industry. Number 1, and this kind of speaks to what we were talking to earlier, poor maintenance. I would like to challenge that with why is it poor maintenance, but maybe we could talk about that. 2, non-compliance with risk management procedures. 3, PPE. 4, undertrained employees, which I would also argue could contribute to all of these issues. And 5, lockout, tagout. And this research was done by TradeSafe. And then another couple tidbits we found with regard to some stats. 30% of workplace injuries are caused by employees during their first year, drops to less than 15% after year 2. 70% of workers with hand injuries weren't wearing gloves. The remaining 30% were wearing gloves, but the gloves weren't adequate for the hazardous work they were doing. Yeah. And then 80 to 90% of serious injuries are due to human error. I think that stat has stayed consistent for 40 years, right? So about the human error aspect of injuries. So even though we may be in a more not everywhere, not in every plant or facility, but most facilities have a more advanced workplace, than 50 or 40, 30 years ago. So why have these, why is it still a concern? And I'd like to talk to both of y'all about your observations about that. So why are we still seeing these numbers?
Well, it's a cultural thing, and it's a cultural thing that's led from the top. All right. I said earlier, the executives don't really understand what reliability is about, and the fact that it's a holistic approach to things. Mm-hmm. And you really need what I think of as you need 3 or 4 things to address this from a safety standpoint, along with the business success, the reducing your costs, having higher profits, and so on. But you need what I think of as executive sponsorship. Mm-hmm. And that means active engagement in assuring operational excellence. And what I've seen is a lot of folks, executives in particular, they'll anoint or appoint or hire or whatever somebody as the vice president of reliability. But in their mind, they're focusing on maintenance. We've got to get this damn maintenance thing fixed. Because you said earlier it's because of poor maintenance. Well, it's not right. Really. It's not really because of poor maintenance. It's because the processes allow for the defects to enter the system. Correct. In design, procurement, so on, and maintenance is at the tail end of this dog.
They're the ones that have to deal with all of those defects in the system that they didn't cause, but they got to clean up the mess, and then they don't get any appreciation for it.
Yeah. Well, they cause some of them.
And they have to do it under stress. Right. Because the system won't allow them to properly plan and schedule and execute without being stressed.
Yeah. So if executives really believed in safety, they would take reliability, operational excellence, they would view that at least as seriously as they do safety, at least. Because if you get
Right.
good reliability, you're going to have better safety. So that's one point. The second point I'd make is you need a really good production and maintenance partnership, working collectively to a common purpose. And there needs to be shared measures that facilitate that collaboration. Because if you hold production responsible for just, getting the goods out the door and maintenance responsible for just getting the equipment back online, then those two objectives are going to be contrary to each other from, quite often, too often, really.
Right.
And so if you hold them both responsible for both issues, then you facilitate, you might say, force collaboration. And then the last thing is to have some sort of process for employee engagement, shop floor in particular, engagement. One of my mantras is if you want to understand the problems with the work, talk to the workers.
Talk to the people doing it.
I mean, now, how obvious is that? And yet most folks don't do nearly enough of that, and getting them engaged vis-a-vis proper training and development, proper tools, proper time, and a process to facilitate what I think of as structured improvement time. Once a week or once a month, the time period will vary. You pick something and you make it right. It might be a procedure. It might be a pumping station. It might be a standard. I don't know. It will vary from organization to organization. And if you have all three of those, you're much more likely to be successful. So I could carry on, but I'll pause and let somebody else talk.
Right. John, let's hear from you. One
Well,
thing that Ron said that I thought was interesting, there was the executive sponsor almost delegating the role of I'm going to hire you, you're going to fix my, reliability, and thinking, okay, I've done that. I've hired somebody for that role. We're good now. I'm not so sure that that's the magic key to success either.
Yeah,
I can assure you it's not.
you said some key words that I think are very important, Ron, and you both said it. One is, if an executive hires a individual to be the corporate reliability leader and they delegate that to them, well, delegation is not being active and visible. Delegation is a task you do for a day and you cross off your to-do list. Okay, took care of that, and then their attention goes somewhere else. As Ron was talking about, sponsorship means investing your own personal capital in leading change. I said earlier, when your results start to plateau, you got to continue to execute the basics well, but you got to look to do something different to get a different result, and you hope that is better. But that has to be led by executives and leaders in an organization. That typically just won't happen organically. So yeah, part of it is getting the leaders aligned and engaged. And what Ron's been talking about are all the bottom two levels of the LCE RX model, reliability excellence model, where we talk about leadership and culture.
Right.
And these are the foundations to drive a safety change and improvement, as well as a reliability improvement. And again, obviously safety and reliability go hand in hand. But it is critical to not just delegate and be done, but to drive change through the organization. And that takes some time and some personal capital.
Yeah, I've seen several times now, executives will appoint, right, somebody, a VP of pickup, they use different names, OpEx,
Continuous
reliability,
improvement,
Right.
operational
Yeah, whatever.
excellence.
And
Yeah.
I don't mean to be overly dismissive of by saying whatever, but the point is they appoint that and they delegate the task to that individual.
Right.
And that individual plays a key role. But if they are subsequently kind of dismissive of the activities and of the role that they play
Right.
in reinforcing that, demanding that, supporting that, encouraging that, rewarding that, then what I've seen happen is after 2 or 3 years, the guy in that role, and it's so far it's always been a guy. There's some really good women out there who probably do a better job. But anyways, the guy quits. Say,
Burn out.
this ain't working. I quit.
Yeah.
And they go somewhere else.
Because
Yeah,
you
I'd
have
say-
to
a
have the
different role.
culture change. The culture change in place is all those other things you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to reinforce this, I had a project one time and it was just what Ron described. Hired a reliability leader for a plant, and that person was working on the tactical things we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
And the needle moved a little bit, but not enough. And then when it became evident that the needle was not moving enough because this individual was more in a facilitator role, not a direct leader role,
Mm.
the executive stepped in and began to be active and visible. And it was a remarkable change in behavior when that occurred. All of a sudden, the organization and the managers in that organization attention changed when they were asked questions by the executive on the status and what were some of the roadblocks to moving the needle. And that person began to get invested weekly in seeing how progress was being made. And it did drive a significant change and accelerated the project. And so it was great to see it firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't have that, well, your likelihood of improving, getting better, you see a little bit, because maintenance does control a few of the defects, but by and large, from a production standpoint, maintenance only controls about 10% of the lost production.
Yeah.
And really that's what a given plant is about, is producing high quality product on time in full. And in fact, I have a new definition of reliability. It's not the probability that a given set of equipment will function for a given period of time under stated conditions, all that stuff. That's
Yep.
good
But
stuff.
that's what Google says.
Yeah, I get that, but I've got a new definition. the my view, it's the ability. Now, this is production plants. You'd have to pick a different set of criteria and maybe wording for a facility like a cold storage facility or whatever. But it's the ability of a production plant to provide the maximum in quality product on time, in full, at the lowest sustainable cost. And I think OEE is the best measure of reliability. It's not unplanned downtime. That's a part of it, of course.
Right.
And it's not, a bunch of other parameters that we could discuss here. But if you take a holistic view of that, then you're more likely going to have a better result out of that. You'll get better performance, better safety, lower costs, and so on, and better environmental performance. I've got data on that as well.
Which
And
is
that's
a hot topic. Well,
yeah,
hot topic. Pun intended. No, which is a topic, of mine of senior leadership. ESG, has become much more focused on, I guess, from external pressures, as well.
Just sorry to interrupt, but here's a little factoid for you. And this data is old. It's about 20 years old, maybe more than that. But DuPont, years ago, decades ago, they measured the energy consumption during non-production hours, and it was 30% of their total energy consumption.
Wow.
Now think about that. You're cooking away, burning energy uselessly,
Yes.
30% of the time. Now, maybe it's 20 today. I don't know. That'd be a good thing to go consider. But that's just a huge number, you know.
Yeah.
And the others I've been associated with are running the risk of losing their license to operate because of environmental releases into the local community. And that's all because of, you know, poor design, procurement, production, and maintenance practices because of, in my view, poor leadership at the highest level that doesn't understand this and doesn't put the right processes in place to address it. You know,
Well, you know-
Deming said 85% of management problems out there because of poor management.
Right.
And then just before he
Right.
died, he said he was wrong. It was 95%.
Ah,
So
But you know, Ron, you raise a very good point about the environmental side. You know, we talk about reliability and certainly the manufacturing production aspect, but the you know in typically in most manufacturing environments, there's environmental control equipment of varying design,
right.
and reliability in that is probably more important because you have to have higher results of the equipment performance relative to the protection of the environment. And I find a lot of times that equipment is almost an afterthought in the maintenance program when you look at their PM schedules, et cetera. So yeah, reliability to me is critical in the environmental aspects of any manufacturing plant.
Yeah, you can't operate in two disparate domains. You can't
Yes.
have a set of processes and equipment you care about, and another set you don't care about. You have to care about all of it.
mm,
And you see that, well, you've just, articulated an example of that where you don't care about some of the equipment. Well, that's going to, bleed over into the rest of the plant. So you sort of have to care about everything.
Well,
Maybe
it's
some more than
yeah.
others.
and that begs a comment that I heard a long time ago. I didn't make this up, but somebody asked, you know, how many pieces of equipment should I take care of? And I said, it's kind of like you just need to brush the teeth that you want to keep.
Right.
I like that. Brush the
You know,
teeth that you want to keep. And you know what? I mean, I would not condone this with regards to dental health, but even having a strategy for run to failure for a specific piece of equipment, that's still care. That's still having a
yes, yes.
destiny for that piece, a strategy for that piece of equipment.
You've made an upfront conscious decision based on a risk assessment of
A
some
risk
type
assessment.
that the consequence of failure is low cost, low impact to safety, and low or no impact to operations. It's when you make a conscious decision, that's a good thing. When you don't think about that, but that's part of your strategy, and you get surprised when something fails that impacts the operation or impacts safety or even impacts the environment, that's not a good thing to be surprised by that.
Yeah. Yeah.
As Ron likes to say, bad things happen when that occurs.
Right. Do all the little things right so the big bad things don't happen. And it really goes back to what John and Tara both mentioned earlier. It has to do with the culture of the organization
Right.
and the leadership setting a standard where you have high expectations. And you can't just have them, you have to support them. You have to create an environment where you allow for the training, the time, and so on, and the engagement of the employees to become part of a culture that demands, supports, executes, and is focused on excellence. You know, some time ago, I heard a VP of a big refining and big oil company, and he said, and it struck me at the time, the lowest standard you set is the highest standard you can expect. And I thought, yeah, wow, that's pretty good. So you better set your standard. Your lowest standard should be pretty high. And then you have to reinforce those standards through the systems that you create to what demand, support, expect, reward, challenge, and so on. Those standards.
You know, we've talked about culture quite a bit, and for folks listening, one of the things that's part of culture is having the right set of measures that gives you a good perspective on performance.
Right.
And so when we mention culture, culture isn't just touchy-feely type of things. It's also figuring out what's the right thing to measure, and then measuring it and setting a goal and an objective, i.e. and a standard. And if you're not meeting that standard, then what do you need to do to close those gaps? If
holding people or holding accountability to them.
Accountability as well, but also back to you know, the whole idea here is that it's very important to select the right measures, and particularly in a safety environment, and because you always will have a combination, or should have a combination, of leading and lagging indicators. But you want to have a goal, and if you're not meeting that goal, figure out what you need to do that. And that helps to engage leadership and executive sponsorship, you know, helping them set the objectives, the vision, the objectives, and cascading those through the organization.
Yeah. And another phrase I picked up, you know, you have to inspect what you expect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you set the expectation, but then you got to go out and, you know, make sure that that expectation is being met, and, you know, inspect what you expect. And not in a, just a caution, you're not in a punitive way.
Right.
You know, because too many guys set the expectation, they go out and it's not being met, and they, you know, as they say, I guess I won't say it on here, but they kick butt and take names.
Right.
You know? Well,
it's
if that's,
punitive. Yeah.
if that's the case, then folks will hide, they will obfuscate, and they, you know, you won't get what you expect.
They'll
But
make
if you
the
go out,
numbers what they want the numbers to be somehow. Yeah.
and if you go out and you use that as a basis for removing the obstacles
Right.
from the success of the folks out there, then they will view that as in a positive light, and they'll make known, you know, what the defects are and where the problems are, and they'll be much more likely to bring them forward so you can address them. So it cannot be punitive. You might challenge on occasion, what do we need to do? But it can't be, I'm going to kick your butt if that happens again. That sort of thing.
That's the employee engagement piece you were talking about earlier.
Nobody wants a butt kicking.
No, I mean, that's a very good point. You know, when you establish some vision and objectives and goals and targets, and you have the right measures, the measures are there to help drive improvement and some accountability. Because if you're going to set a standard at some level, then that's the lowest you're willing to accept. As Ron talks about, you have to hold the organization accountable to achieve that standard. It may, to get there, it may require coaching and active and visible leadership, but it is important to, in effect, stripe the field and know where you are on the field. Yeah.
Well, this, you know, you got to be demanding. You know, in my previous life, I was, as you probably know, I was president of a little company called CSI, and I was quite demanding, but I was also supportive. And too many executives out there are very demanding, but they're not particularly supportive. In fact, I chastised a refinery manager one time. Listen, Ed, you're very demanding, but you're not very supportive. And he was offended by my comment. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, one of you guys just came in and they were talking about a problem, and they told you they were going to spend, I don't know, 5 or 10 grand to correct the problem. And you challenged them on that and wanted them to take it out of the existing budget. Well, you didn't have to say that. You know, just let them manage it for you. If they're not competent to manage it, then you got the wrong guy in the slot you got him in. And, you know, that just put a damper on things. And $10,000 at a refinery is, well, I could use some colorful phrases here.
A rounding error.
Yeah, it's a decimal
Error.
point, in a multi-billion-dollar operation. So I just thought, anyways, to his credit, he came around,
Well, that's
It-
about empowering, right? And
yeah,
empowering your teams goes back to what you were talking about getting the engagement from your key employees,
yeah, yeah. And you have to, I mean, if people don't have the latitude and feel the freedom to address the issues and problems without, dotting every I and crossing every T, and there are times when that's appropriate, I get that. But you got to give people the freedom sometimes to make a few mistakes
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and ask them what they learned and what they're going to do differently next time without being overly punitive. And again, removing the obstacles from their success. And that, to me, that's a huge opportunity for most executives. What I have to do to leverage those hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of employees to get them more engaged in doing a better job. And that too will, the culture will, change. It'll get better and you'll have better performance out of the company as a whole.
Many years ago, I read an article about a major corporation, and the chairman of the board hired a new CEO. And bottom line, he said, I hired this individual to give the organization permission to change. And
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty powerful statement coming from a chairman level person. But he recognized the organization, and it is many tens of thousands needed to change. And they were smart folks, obviously, but they needed to start doing things different.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I think, Ron, you're talking about is when you're encouraging people, you can be demanding, leading and demanding, but also give people permission to change and try some things.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I used to do, and it's going back lots of years, is, we'd have these company meetings and I would say, look, you guys are closer to the problems than I am. If you see a problem, solve it. You have my permission. If you make a mistake, I forgive you and your boss forgives you. and what did you learn? What can you do differently next time to make it better? If you make a big mistake, it's my fault for not giving you the right tools, the right systems, and so on. In truth, I would go back to my office and close the door and go, God, I hope that works. I mean, you're taking a huge risk.
Yes, you are.
But engaging or so-called empowering, hundreds of folks or thousands is a lot better than trying to constrain them and not effectively use the brain power that's out there. And they'll make mistakes. Okay, what'd you learn? What are you going to do differently next time? So I just think it's really, really important to address the culture of an organization. You give people the freedom to maybe, to improve, but occasionally make some mistakes. And that way they don't feel like they're taking a risk with their career or with their performance bonus or with their pay raise or getting fired. So it to me, it's just really, really important that the executives, their sponsors, active engagement in the process. So, all right.
So I think so. We've talked a lot in this session about executive sponsorship and culture change. I want to take it down, and we'll recap that in a little bit. But I want to take it down to the managerial level. So you don't have that spending budget of the CEO. What can people do individually at their level to make things safer, to improve, to try to take out some of those defects? What would be y'all's recommendation?
Well, the individual, they, if you want to understand the problems with the work, talk to the workers. The individuals are going to know where most of the issues are. They might not have a solution. They might not understand why, but there has to be some process for engaging them in identifying the defects, the problems with the work, the processes, and so on. And then there has to be, beyond that, there has to be some sort of process whereby they have permission to address this, or they become part of a team that's allowed to address this issue, that then gets approved, reported. They have to have the time and the resources to address these. So the senior management, site manager, VP, and so on, they have to create an environment where that's expected and even demanded and not frowned upon when folks do that. It goes back to some of the things we've already discussed.
Right, the structured time for improvement that you were talking about.
Yeah, just a little factoid for you. And it hasn't really changed much over the past, I guess, 10 years. Something on the order of 30% of employees in a given company are engaged. They're actively seeking to make things better, to do a really good job, and so on. About 50% are disengaged. Now, that doesn't mean they're not working, but they're kind of doing the minimum. They're doing enough to, get by. They're sightseeing. That is a phrase I use, not literally, but they're getting by. And another 15, 20% are actively disengaged. That is, they're actually doing damage to the organization by virtue of their dissatisfaction and their grousing and complaining and whining, and they're a negative influence on the organization. So the more you can do to engage more of those folks, particularly the disengaged ones, the better off you're going to be, the more productive you are. It's really, really important.
What
John,
would you add to that, John? Yeah.
Well, one, I'm familiar with that study that Ron's talking about, and those numbers haven't shifted a lot over the years, which is disappointing, but it is a fact. Back to your question about a single manager, one of the things that I've done as a single manager in the past and do as a consultant today is sometimes people can't see what the problem is, i.e. the higher ups. So getting some data and evaluating that data and validating that it is correct data to identify the problem and the size of the problem, to engage how do we improve it, is helpful to selling the need to change up the ladder, so to speak. Most leaders, managers want to see some data and then be able to measure off of that. So walking and saying, oh, we have a safety problem. Okay, we all know we have a safety problem. How are we going to, as I like to say, peel the onion back layer at a time and solve it? Well, you've got to get the data, understand what's driving your current performance, and then pick off the top problem and begin to work on it. And as Ron said, have time to work on it, right? But at least now you've quantified it, and you, if agreed to, then you can at least measure it and then begin to work on the things that it takes to trial and error to make the improvement. Yeah. So as a single individual, just making the effort to get the data, and it's not going to be complete, but validating what you have, and then being able to present, is this a sizable opportunity for the organization? And typically it is. And there's multiple problems associated with, say, safety improvement. Then Pareto it out and pick off the top one and begin to work on it, and then pick off the second one and work on it. But having data is your friend.
Well, I want to add to that at a strategic level. Most of the operations, I'm sure you've seen this too, John, is that most of the operations I've been have I wouldn't necessarily call it short term, but over the next 1, 2, 3 years, have the opportunity to improve capacity by at least 10%. Their OEE might be whatever, 50 or 60%, and 70% might be above average or 75 certainly would.
Mhm.
In a discrete plant, and maybe they're running 70 or 80% in a process plant, then 80 to 90 would be a better number. So
Sure.
the question I would be posing is, what's that worth? If you could sell it, and if you're going to grow the business, you damn well better be able to sell it.
Right.
And so what's that worth to you? And the second thing is, most of these operations have the opportunity to sustainably reduce maintenance costs by 10% and probably more. So if you just take 10% production value of the gross profit on that, 10% reduction in maintenance costs, then what's that worth? Well, in large organizations, that's worth literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And most executives pay attention to that. Remember I said first out of the gate, I said, yeah, they really care about money. And so there's your business case from a high level holistic approach. And then of course, as John just articulated, you really need to break that down into all these little issues that need shop floor engagement, middle management engagement, to address. And if you do that, you're, along with a cultural thing, then you're likely to have better performance, better safety, and so on. Well, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, and of course, as we've been saying all along, improving OEE, reducing your costs by improving OEE, and is reducing variability, eliminating defects, and improving reliability, and ditto for the safety part of that, right? Because as you're driving better OEE and reducing the variability, and there's a quantifiable dollar amount for doing that. As Ron said, there's an equal impact on the safety side.
Mm-hmm.
So, your question started with, what can a single manager and a single engineer do at a location? Collect some data and begin to work on these things and make the business case for improving safety, make the business case for improving OEE.
Yeah.
Right. To get that investment.
We've also touched on culture several times. I just wanted to make a point about, managing cultural change. And, I've got, like 3 things that you do. Step one is you've got to, provide a compelling reason for change, whether that be safety, whether that be, process improvement, earning the right to new capital, and so on. But there has to be a compelling reason for change, because people are risk averse, they're change averse.
Absolutely.
The devil they know is better than the devil they don't, unless you give them a compelling reason to
a good
buy into the new one.
Always.
So, yeah. And so that's one thing, compelling reason for change. Second thing is there has to be, something in it for them. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be money. It might be a more secure future, for the plant and the operation.
Safer
it
work
might be a
environment,
safer environment. It might be less hassle. But, there has to be something in it for them, and you should be able to articulate that. And then the last thing, and I think the most important one, is there has to be a process for engaging them in creating the changes, so that they'll have a sense of purpose, a sense of ownership, a sense of control about the changings that are ongoing, that provide them with a benefit that supports that compelling reason. And you have to have all 3 of these to, help create this cultural change within an organization. And it's not something you do once and it's done. It's something you continuously do forever, because entropy always wins, right?
Yes, entropy always wins. And I think it was Simon Sinek that talks about an infinite game. And it is, to your point, infinite.
Yeah. Tara, do you know what entropy is?
I do, but I would like for you to, it reminds me of 8th grade chemistry. But I also, why don't you share a little description of it in terms of industrial operations with our audience?
Well, it's the tendency for a system to dissociate, to get worse. until it reaches a stable state, right? And so entropy, all systems have a tendency, entropy always wins. They have a tendency to dissociate unless you put enough energy in them to create, a stable environment at a high level of performance. And so you can't just do these things once and you're done. You have to sustain them at that level and put the energy, the resources into doing that.
And
Otherwise,
that's that's
entropy
that
wins.
leadership courage.
And
That's that
Ron,
leadership courage right there.
Ron, the amount of energy to sustain a high performing organization, I believe, is a little less than the energy to raise the bar, so to speak. That takes a lot of work.
Yeah, I think you're right. I haven't seen the case yet where it was more
Easy.
than.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyways, those are just, a few thoughts on all this. We've kind of digressed a little bit away from specifically addressing the safety issue, but all these things are essential for a
Correct.
safe, cost-effective, as they say, reliable plant. A reliable plant is a safe plant, is a cost-effective plant, is an environmentally friendly plant. And
There you
reliability
go.
comes about when you have a holistic approach to reliability led from the top with collaboration and shop floor engagement. So that's kind
I
of
think
sum and
that is
substance
the
of it.
hashtag tagline for this episode. And that's exactly, I think it's exactly where we intended this episode to be, is because it's not just about safety. It's about holistic operational excellence and performance, and it's all connected. So I just want to say we're coming up on wrapping up our conversation that's been so rich. We've dug into some real topics today. We've uncovered some enlightening observations about the connectivity of reliable and safe operations today. I just want to summarize a few things that I wrote down for our listeners about reducing defects across the life cycle. That standard work helps reduce that variation, helps reduce that risk in terms of when you're doing when you have to do emergency work.
Let me interject something. It's not just standard work. It's not just standard work in maintenance. It's
Correct.
standard work in operations and so on.
And in design and in all of. Go ahead, John.
It's the standard and standard operating procedures.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
The S and SOP. I like it. About courage from leadership and executive sponsorship supporting the production and maintenance partnerships, creating the right measures, holding people responsible to achieve shared goals, about shop floor engagement, about structured time for improvement, where you're giving people the time that they can make the small changes that go into making big changes. Personal capital from leadership. I really like that phrase, John. I think that really hits home, that you need to, as a leader, you need to invest some personal capital into creating a culture of operational excellence. That the lowest standard you set is the highest standard you can expect. Brush the teeth you want to keep. I also like that phrase. So if you have the 3 steps of change, a reason for change, what's in it for me, and engagement, engaging the people who are going to be affected by the change in making the change and defining how that change is executed. Get data, validate what you have, create business cases for improvement wherever you are in the organization. And a reliable plant is a safe plant, is a cost-effective plant, is an environmentally friendly plant, and I would even add, is an engaging, it's a place where people want to work, right? It's a place where people want to invest their daylight, sometimes nighttime hours at.
Yeah. I'll tell you one more story. Ken Piety gave this, told this story. Again, this is decades ago. He told a story about a fourth person who was walking through a rock quarry, and he came up to one of the guys working in the rock quarry, and he said, what are you doing? The guy says, well, I'm pounding rocks. That's what they pay me to do. Oh, okay. And he goes to a second guy and he says, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm making a living for my family. I want them to have a better life than I've had, and so this will probably help them do that. And he went to the third guy and he said, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm building a cathedral for God. So they're all pounding rocks,
Right.
but they have a different perspective on the meaning of that. And the more you can provide, your folks, with some sort of inspirational objective about, the work you're doing having more meaning than just pounding rocks, the
Yeah.
better off you're going to be as a company. And I like that story, because I always tried to inspire folks that, hey, we're building a cathedral. We're changing the way the world performs maintenance. And to the extent you can do that, I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's that vision. John, what would you say about that?
I couldn't add anything more to that. I think that's great. Change your perspective. It's more than just pounding rocks.
Right.
That's right. Oh gosh, well, thank you both so much for your time, Ron and John. This has been a great conversation. If you'd like to reach out to the speakers directly, I know you can find John on LinkedIn. Ron, if anybody would like to reach out to you, how would you like for them to contact you? They can always reach out to me too if you want to speak to Ron. You can find me on LinkedIn. Tara Holwegner, please contact.
That's fine. My email is ronsrmgp@aol.com. And phone number is 865-675-7647.
Man, you even give out your phone number, Ron? This is how much he wants to help people improve.
Well,
that's how dedicated he is to it.
I don't do LinkedIn. I don't do Facebook. I don't have a website. I don't do any of that. It's too much aggravation.
Simple, to right to the point. But if you'd also, for listeners, if you'd like to explore more about this, just head to our podcast channel. You'll see some notes. We'll provide some resources in the speaker notes, one of Ron's articles actually about this exact topic. But I want to, again, thank you both so much for joining us today. Any final thoughts for the listeners before you sign off?
It's a journey. That's all I would say, that it's a journey. It's not a flip the light switch and today you're one result and tomorrow it's different. It is a journey.
Yeah, I second that. So
well,
we've said enough. We'll let folks go.
Okay, well, thank you, listeners, and thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Get Smarter podcast. Until next time, listeners, stay smarter, people.